There is a kind of ache that doesn't scream. It doesn't tear through your chest or break you down in public. It whispers, slowly, quietly, like a distant echo in the background of your life. It shows up in the still moments, when the distractions finally lose their grip, when the noise dies down, and you're left alone with yourself. That ache is not pain in the traditional sense. It's not sorrow. It's not despair. It's something far more subtle, far more hollow, a quiet emptiness, a void that modern life keeps trying to fill, but never quite succeeds. You feel it in the morning scroll through your phone, when you're looking at faces, words, lives, all perfectly curated, and still none of it touches you. You feel it when you're surrounded by people, laughter in the air, conversations buzzing, and yet inside you feel distant. Not disconnected from them, disconnected from yourself, from your soul, from something deeper that once felt real, but now seems unreachable. This emptiness isn't caused by any one thing. It isn't dramatic. It isn't always noticeable, but it is constant, a background hum in the machinery of modern existence. You might have everything: opportunities, entertainment, comfort, convenience. But somehow, none of it reaches that aching place inside. You keep going, you keep consuming, you keep moving, because stillness reveals it, and that's terrifying. We live in a world that praises motion. Productivity is worshipped. Business is virtue. We're always becoming, always optimizing, always upgrading. But what are we upgrading toward? What are we running from? There is a part of us, the quiet part, that no one seems to talk about. The part that longs not to achieve, but to belong. Not to be efficient, but to be whole. We are surrounded by voices telling us we're not enough, that we need to buy more, do more, be more. And so we try. We collect things, experiences, followers, titles. We pile them up like armor. But somehow, despite all this, the ache remains. The soul is not nourished by more. It is nourished by meaning. And meaning has become hard to find. Because meaning doesn't shout. It doesn't advertise itself. It doesn't come in the form of dopamine hits or next day delivery. Meaning comes slowly, gently over time. It is born in the depths, not the surface, but we are a culture addicted to the surface. Speed over depth, quantity over quality, novelty over wisdom. We swipe through moments. We fast forward through feelings. We escape into our screens, hoping to avoid that strange emptiness inside. But the irony is, the more we avoid it, the more it grows. The more we distract ourselves, the more we lose ourselves. And in that losing, the ache deepens. Sometimes in rare moments of solitude, maybe on a quiet walk, or late at night when the world is asleep, we feel the ache clearly. It's like a gentle sadness, a soft grief for something we can't name. It's not always painful. Sometimes it's just still, like an unanswered question that lives in the heart. Why, we wonder, do I feel so empty, even when I'm full of everything I was told I needed? Maybe it's because deep down, we sense that the world we live in, as it stands, was not built for the soul. It was built for commerce, for speed, for constant growth. But the soul does not want growth. The soul wants grounding. It wants meaning, belonging, intimacy. It wants to matter, not in a performative way, not in metrics, but in the way a tree matters to the forest or a child to their parent, quietly, eternally. But in this fast, moving river of modern life, we were never taught how to stand still. We were never taught how to be alone without being lonely, how to sit with our sadness and listen, rather than fix, how to accept that emptiness might not be a flaw, but a signal, a message from the deeper parts of ourselves that we have wandered too far from what's real. Zygmunt Bauman, the philosopher who named this condition, saw it coming long before most. He called our era liquid modernity, a time where nothing holds its shape, nothing is solid. Everything is temporary, transient, disposable. Commitments fade, jobs shift, identities blur. In such a world, the old anchors, tradition, community, permanence, dissolve. And when the anchors dissolve, we drift. And in drifting, we feel the ache. We keep trying to fill the void with the next thing, the new thing. But maybe the answer isn't to fill it. Maybe the answer is to understand it, to sit with it, to ask, what is this emptiness trying to tell me? Maybe it's telling you that you're tired of pretending, that you're wary of performance, that your soul is begging for something deeper, something more sacred than scrolling and striving. Maybe it's telling you that meaning cannot be downloaded, that intimacy cannot be hacked, that presence cannot be scheduled. This ache, this quiet, persistent emptiness, is not a weakness. It is a whisper from the parts of us we've silenced. It is the call to return to something older, something true. It is the longing to remember who we were before the noise, before the algorithms, before the endless doing. It is the soul asking not to be entertained, but to be seen. And perhaps this ache is not our enemy, but our compass. Because when we finally stop running from it, we can begin to understand where it comes from and where it leads. To a truth buried beneath the modern madness. A truth Bauman understood, that in a liquid society, what we miss most is not freedom, but foundation. Not speed, but depth. Not novelty, but meaning. And that is where we begin to move toward the lesson. Not of consumption, but of connection. Not of endless freedom, but of thoughtful choice. Not of drifting endlessly, but of learning how to anchor ourselves again. Now, let's go deeper into what Bauman saw, and why this liquid life, for all its freedom, leaves so many of us quietly aching for something solid, something lasting, something real. In a world where everything flows, nothing holds, we have slipped into a time where solidity has lost its place, where nothing is meant to last, and permanence is mistaken for prison. We call it progress. We call it freedom. But in the silence beneath it all, something in us whispers that we've lost the very thing that made us feel grounded, known, real. This is the essence of what Zygmunt Bauman called liquid modernity. Bauman saw it clearly, even when few were willing to name it. The world is no longer built for stability. In fact, stability itself has become suspect. To stay in one place, to commit to one path, to hold one identity, it feels almost unnatural now. We're taught to keep moving, keep changing, keep consuming, because to pause to root is to risk being left behind. We used to build our lives like houses, brick by brick, laid over time. Foundations mattered. So did legacy, so did memory. But now, life is less a house and more a tent. Quickly pitched, easily packed up, moved without consequence. We don't build anymore. We sample, we scroll, we skim. Not just through content, but through people, through ideas, through identities. We become curators of fleeting selves rather than seekers of enduring truths. Bauman wasn't mourning the past. He was mourning the disappearance of the solid, of the deep, of the durable. He noticed that in this new liquid state, everything becomes flexible, yes, but also fragile. Nothing holds because nothing is meant to. And if nothing is meant to hold, how can we? Our jobs, temporary. Our relationships, often transactional. Even our beliefs shift with the tides of culture. We adapt endlessly, reshaping ourselves to fit the moment. But when you reshape yourself too many times, you begin to forget the shape you started with. And somewhere in that forgetting, the soul begins to ache. We are told that to be free is to be fluid, to not be tied down. But Bauman warned that this freedom, without direction, becomes a form of drowning. Because when everything flows, when nothing stays the same, we lose the ability to find footing. The ground is always moving. We become like leaves on a current, free to go anywhere, yet belonging nowhere. Think about it. How often do we truly invest in anything for the long term? How often do we allow discomfort to ripen into wisdom, instead of abandoning it for the next distraction? How often do we let silence speak, rather than filling it with noise? The liquid society is impatient. It doesn't wait. It wants now. It wants fast. And in that speed, we lose not only depth, but also the self. And Bauman saw this too in a liquid world. Identity becomes a project rather than a discovery. You don't uncover who you are. You build it, edit it, broadcast it. You become a performance of yourself. But a performance is exhausting. It requires an audience. And it cannot be sustained without applause. This is why so many of us are tired, not because we do too much, but because we are always becoming and never being, always adjusting, never arriving, always chasing, never resting. And in that relentless pursuit of becoming, we are quietly haunted by the sense that we are losing something sacred, something that cannot be named, but only felt. Bauman described how in this liquid life, even our connections become shallow. Relationships are no longer built to endure challenge. They are optimized for convenience. We have contacts instead of communities, followers instead of friends. Intimacy has been outsourced to algorithms. Vulnerability feels dangerous. And so, we scroll through hundreds of faces, but struggle to look one person in the eyes and say, "This is who I truly am." The liquid society doesn't want friction. It doesn't want stillness. Stillness means noticing. Friction means commitment. Both are inconvenient. But without them, we remain strangers to each other and to ourselves. We float from one role to the next, one identity to the next, hoping that somewhere along the way, we'll feel whole. But wholeness isn't found in motion. It's found in meaning. And meaning, real meaning, takes time. It takes loss. It takes loyalty to things that don't change just because the world does. Bauman understood that we had replaced meaning with utility, that relationships, ideas, even ethics were becoming disposable. What doesn't serve us quickly is discarded quietly. And so, we carry a hidden grief, a grief for things that might have become beautiful, had we only stayed long enough to see them through. But in the liquid society, staying feels foolish. Why invest in something that might not last? Why trust in something that might not adapt? The market of life has taught us that there is always a better option just around the corner. Always a newer version. Always an upgrade. But upgrades don't nourish the soul. They feed the ego. And the ego, no matter how well fed, is never satisfied. So we keep moving, keep changing, keep consuming. Not because we're free, but because we're afraid. Afraid to stay, afraid to settle, afraid to miss out, afraid, most of all, of what we might find if we finally stop running. Because if we stop, if we really stop, we may have to face the truth that Bauman so gently exposed, that we are lonely in ways we do not yet understand, that we are rootless in a world that was never meant to be lived this fast, that we are trying to swim in a current designed to sweep us away from ourselves. And yet, here's the quiet paradox of Bauman's insight. It is not an attack on modernity, but an invitation to ask, what are we losing in this constant flow? What are we sacrificing at the altar of speed and choice? And more importantly, what might we recover if we learn to stand still again? This is the lesson of liquid modernity. Not just that we live in a changing world, but that the way we relate to change determines the depth of our humanity. That maybe, just maybe, the answer isn't to resist the flow, but to become conscious within it, to build small islands of solidity, acts of devotion, practices of presence, commitments that outlast the moment. Because even in a liquid world, meaning can still be made. But it will not be found on the surface. It waits for us in the deep. And now, perhaps it is time to dive. But what does it mean to live in a world where everything is disposable? Not just the coffee cups, or the plastic bags, or the packaging we discard without thought, but the ideas we abandon when they no longer trend, the people we unfriend when they no longer serve us, the identities we shed like skins when they no longer earn us praise. In Bauman's liquid society, disposability becomes a value in itself. We are taught to cherish the new, to romanticize the temporary, to pursue the next without ever asking what was wrong with the now. And so we trade depth for speed, longevity for novelty, presence for performance. It's subtle, this shift. You don't notice it all at once. It creeps in quietly, like water through the cracks in a foundation. You start by changing your job more often, then your city, then your community, then, eventually, your commitments. The relationships that once held weight begin to feel like burdens. The dreams that once guided you feel outdated. Even your own self-image becomes a revolving door, updated, upgraded, and rebranded to fit the demands of the moment. We have become archivists of abandoned selves. Scroll far enough back in anyone's feed, and you will find ghosts, past versions, forgotten passions, pieces of the soul that were once real, but are now buried under layers of curated identity. In the disposable age, everything is optimized for the short term. Friendships are measured in engagement, attention spans in seconds, love in convenience. The soul, slow, tender, fragile, has little place here. It speaks in a language the modern world has forgotten: silence, stillness, commitment. But the soul does not disappear just because it is ignored. It waits. It waits in those quiet moments when your phone dies and you're left alone with yourself. It waits in the spaces between distractions. Those in between seconds when you're not consuming or producing or performing. It waits in the ache that comes when everything is going right. Yet something still feels missing. That ache is not dysfunction. It is not failure. It is the soul mourning its own neglect. It is the sacred part of you reminding you that life is not meant to be lived on the surface. We were not built for constant change. We were not wired to be endlessly adaptive, endlessly open, endlessly available. We were built for rhythm, not chaos, for depth, not distraction, for belonging, not branding. And yet, we are constantly told that to survive in the modern world, we must stay fluid. That to be relevant, we must evolve. That to be desirable, we must remain unattached. So we become expert shapeshifters, always transitioning, always adjusting, never arriving. We call it resilience. But too often, it is surrender, a slow erasure of the parts of us that were never meant to change. In a disposable age, even time is consumed, not lived. Moments are captured, filtered, and forgotten. We are so busy preserving the illusion of life that we forget to participate in it. We chase permanence through pixels, hoping that if we post enough, share enough, perform enough, we will be remembered. But memory built on performance is as fleeting as the attention it attracts. There is a deep sorrow that comes from being constantly seen, but never truly known, from being liked, but not loved, from being watched, but not witnessed. This is the spiritual emptiness Bauman warned us about. The soul's slow starvation in a world that values appearance over essence. We think we are more connected than ever, and in a way we are. But connection is not proximity. It is not reach. It is not data. Connection is depth. It is staying when it's easier to leave. It is listening when it's easier to speak. It is choosing the imperfect person again and again when the algorithm offers you infinite options. But the disposable age does not teach us to choose. It teaches us to consume. And when people are consumed rather than chosen, they cease to feel sacred. And when nothing is sacred, life becomes weightless. Light enough to float, but too hollow to land. How can a soul feel grounded in a world where everything is temporary? It can't. And so it drifts. We drift from one relationship to another, never lingering long enough to let love take root. We drift from one job to the next, never staying long enough to know if it was our calling or just another distraction. We drift through life with a kind of sophisticated numbness, appearing functional, even successful, while something essential in us slowly fades. This is not a moral failing. It is not weakness. It is the natural result of a culture that has forgotten how to hold, how to tend, how to preserve. We have learned how to start, but not how to stay, how to spark, but not how to sustain. And without the ability to stay, everything becomes disposable: relationships, ideas, even our own sense of self. But the soul is not disposable. It cannot be upgraded or optimized. It does not thrive on endless reinvention. It wants to be known. Not in parts, but in whole. Not just in our highlights, but in our wounds, our flaws, our still becoming. And to be known, truly known, requires us to stay. To stay with people even when they're difficult. To stay with ourselves even when we feel lost. To stay with the quiet, aching questions that the world tries so hard to silence. In the disposable age, staying is an act of rebellion. Staying present, staying loyal, staying human. When you stay, truly stay, you begin to notice things. The way silence holds more than sound. The way someone's eyes can speak more truth than their words. The way your own heart, when you finally listen, begins to whisper things you forgot you knew. And slowly, something shifts. What once felt empty begins to feel full. What once felt meaningless begins to glow with a quiet clarity. You begin to see that the soul is not something you have to chase. It is not something you can lose. It is something you return to. Not through motion, but through stillness. Not through addition, but through attention. Not through the next thing, but through this one. This is where reflection leads us. Not to escape the disposable age, but to see through it. To find, amid all the noise and speed, a deeper rhythm. one that honors what endures, one that remembers what matters, one that allows us, finally, to land. And from this place of stillness, of soul, of sacred presence, we begin to ask not just how to survive in a liquid world, but how to live in it with meaning, with intention, with heart. And that, perhaps, is where the journey truly begins. And so here we are, at the edge of everything, looking back at the flow we've been caught in. This liquid life where nothing settles, where even the self is something to be constructed and reconstructed endlessly, until we forget the shape of our original form. We've followed the current for so long that stillness feels unnatural. It feels like failure, like we're falling behind. But perhaps we are not behind. Perhaps we are just beginning to remember. In a world obsessed with motion, stillness is radical. It asks something of us that the modern world forgot how to value: presence. Not the kind of presence that seeks to be noticed, but the kind that notices, the kind that stays, the kind that sinks in. Because to be still is not to be stagnant. It is not to give up or disengage. Stillness is not the absence of movement, but the fullness of being. It is not inaction. It is intention. It is where the noise clears, and the self, long buried beneath the debris of distraction, rises like a quiet tide. There is a wisdom in stillness, a kind of ancient intelligence that can only speak when everything else grows quiet. It does not rush. It does not shout. It does not need to prove itself. It simply waits, patiently, for us to remember that truth isn't always found in the next thing. Sometimes, truth is found in what stays. In a liquid world, permanence is rare, but maybe that's why it's sacred. Maybe the things that endure, kindness, loyalty, love, presence, are so precious because they resist the current. They are not disposable. They are not trending. They do not shout for our attention. And yet, when we finally look, really look, they are the only things that make life feel real. Bauman warned us that in the rush to escape the constraints of solidity, we also escaped its gifts. That in rejecting tradition, we lost guidance. That in abandoning commitment, we lost intimacy. That in worshipping freedom, we forgot the beauty of choosing to stay. But now, perhaps, we are ready to reclaim what was lost. Stillness is where we begin. Stillness allows us to feel the weight of our own breath, to hear the soft stirrings of the soul. It teaches us how to inhabit the moment, not as a stepping stone to something better, but as a sacred destination in itself. It reminds us that meaning does not come from quantity, but from attention, that we do not need to constantly reinvent ourselves to be worthy of love, that sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is to be exactly who we are, where we are, and let that be enough. Stillness is not glamorous. It does not promise applause, but it offers something far more enduring: intimacy with the present. And in that intimacy, we begin to taste a kind of wholeness that all the striving could never offer. It is in stillness that we learn to sit with discomfort, rather than escape it, to hold questions without rushing to answer them, to look at another person, not to fix, judge, or impress, but simply to witness, to see, and to be seen. This is what the liquid world cannot give us. It can offer us connection, but not communion. It can offer us updates, but not understanding. It can offer us freedom, but not the roots we so desperately need. We think we need more time, more things, more opportunities. But what we often need most is less noise, less pressure, less of the endless reaching and more of the gentle returning. Returning to simplicity, returning to essence, returning to a way of being that does not hinge on performance, but on presence. Stillness is the doorway to that return. But make no mistake, stillness is not easy. In fact, it may be one of the hardest things we do. Because when we are still, all that we've been avoiding begins to surface. The grief we've buried, the longings we've silenced, the questions we've refused to ask. Stillness holds a mirror to the parts of ourselves we've been running from, but it also offers us the grace to finally face them, to hold them, to understand them. And in that understanding, something remarkable happens. We begin to soften. We begin to listen. We begin to heal. This is how we reclaim our depth, not through force, but through surrender. Not by building something new, but by remembering what was never broken. The world will keep pulling. It will keep asking you to move faster, be better, consume more. But you don't have to follow. You can choose to root. You can choose to stay. You can choose to build something solid in a world that tells you to float. You can choose to love deeply, even when it's inconvenient. To commit to something real, even when it's not easy. To be present, even when the world tells you to look away. Because in the end, what we crave isn't motion, it's meaning. And meaning is born not in the chase, but in the still places. The quiet mornings, the long conversations, the steady rhythms of lives shared over time. Meaning is born when we choose not to move on, but to move in, into ourselves, into each other, into the sacred slowness of being alive. In this way, stillness becomes resistance. It becomes healing. It becomes home. And perhaps this is Bauman's deepest wisdom. Not that the world has become liquid, but that within it, we still have the power to build islands, to choose depth, to choose devotion, to choose to be human in a world that is rushing toward the inhuman. You do not need to have all the answers. You do not need to outrun the current. You only need to remember that there is a place in you the world cannot touch, a place that is steady, quiet, whole. Return to that place. Honor it. Let it shape you. Because the world will always flow. But you can still learn to stand. And perhaps, in learning to stand, you will become a lighthouse for others. Still, shining, unwavering, guiding them not to escape the liquid world, but to find themselves within it. And that is how the soul remembers its way home.